Music was too loud for a Tuesday afternoon, and I remember thinking that even before I sat down. The kind of music that fills a room so completely you can't hear yourself think. And maybe that was the point. Maybe no one was supposed to think that night. Maybe especially not me. I had driven 45 minutes from my house in Macon to get to that restaurant. A place called Harlow's. One of those new steakhouses downtown Atlanta where the menus don't have prices because if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. My daughter had picked it. Of course she had. She had expensive taste that I'd spent 62 years of my life not being able to afford, and somehow she'd grown up to think that was my fault. I wore my good dress, the navy one with the cream buttons I'd bought on sale at Dillard's 3 winters ago. I'd had it dry cleaned the week before. I pressed my hair, put on the pearl earrings my mother left me. I wanted to look like I belonged there. I wanted her to be proud of me, standing next to her just for one night. I should have known better. I really should have. Her name is Cassidy, my daughter, and for most of her 34 years on this earth, I believe that if I just loved her hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, she would eventually turn around and see me the way I needed to be seen. Mothers tell themselves that lie for decades. Some of us never stop. I raised Cassidy alone from the time she was 9 years old. Her father, my ex-husband, left us for a woman he met at a work conference in Nashville. He didn't look back, didn't send cards, didn't call on birthdays, didn't contribute a single dollar to the mortgage or the electric bill or the school supplies or the field trips. He just left, the way some men do, like closing a door quietly behind them so they don't have to hear anyone cry. I worked at Grady Memorial Hospital for 31 years as a registered nurse. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, every Christmas morning from 1994 to 2019. I ate vending machine sandwiches at 2 in the morning more times than I can count. I drove home in the dark, let myself into a quiet house, checked on Cassidy sleeping, and then set my alarm for 5 hours later to do it all again. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because what comes later won't make any sense unless you understand what came before. When Cassidy got into Georgia State, I cried in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive home. She was the first person in my family to go to a 4-year university. I paid for it, every semester. I refinanced my house once, and I picked up agency nursing shifts on my days off to cover the rest. I didn't tell her how hard it was. I didn't want her to carry that weight. I thought I was protecting her. Her father showed up at her graduation. 4 years later, having contributed exactly nothing, he showed up in a new suit with his wife and stood in the photographs like he'd been there all along. And Cassidy let him. She seemed happy to have him there. I told myself that was okay. I told myself children need their fathers, even absent ones, even ones who didn't earn it. I swallowed it down like I swallowed everything else. After graduation, Cassidy moved to Atlanta. She got a job in marketing. She met a man named, and I'll just call him my son-in-law because that's all he ever was to me, a title, never a real relationship. She met him at some rooftop party in Buckhead, and within 18 months, they were engaged. He came from money. Old Georgia money, the kind that has a family name on a building somewhere. His mother wore things I'd never be able to name, fabrics I couldn't identify, shoes that cost more than my monthly nursing pension. The first time I met her, she looked at me the way people look at something they're surprised to find in a nice neighborhood. She smiled. She said, "How lovely." She didn't mean it. Cassidy changed when she got serious with him. Slowly at first, then all at once. The calls got shorter. The visits stopped. When I called her, she sounded distracted, like I was keeping her from something more important. I told myself she was busy, building her life. That's what children do. That's what you work so hard for, so they can go build something bigger than what you gave them. The diagnosis came 18 months before the graduation dinner. I'd noticed something on my neck, a lump, small at first, then not so small. My own doctor had ordered imaging. The results came back on a Wednesday afternoon, and I was sitting alone in the examination room when the radiologist said the word thyroid, and then the word mass, and then a string of other words I wrote down in the notes app of my phone because my hands were shaking too hard to write on paper. It wasn't the worst kind. That's what they kept saying. Not the worst kind. As if that was supposed to feel like good news. I had surgery scheduled, then radiation follow-up, then 6 months of monitoring. The mass was on the right side of my neck, and for a while after the surgery, it was visible. A scar, some swelling, a slight asymmetry when I turned my head. Nothing that would stop a stranger from looking. Nothing that wouldn't make a vain person uncomfortable standing next to me in photographs. I told Cassidy about the diagnosis on a Saturday morning phone call. She said, "Oh, Mom," and then she said she was sorry, and then she said she had to go because they were looking at a venue that afternoon. I sat on my back porch after I hung up and I listened to the birds for a long time. She got married in September of the following year, a Saturday at a vineyard estate outside Dahlonega. It was the most beautiful wedding I had ever seen. The flowers alone would have paid 3 months of my mortgage. I know because I paid for a portion of them. I paid for the rehearsal dinner as well. I paid for the bridesmaid gifts and the morning of brunch and the hotel block for out-of-town family and the custom favors that were little jars of local honey with ribbon tied around them. The total I spent on my daughter's wedding, $47,000. My entire savings account. Money I had been putting away since Cassidy was 12 years old. Money I called my someday fund, for someday when I couldn't work anymore. Someday when the knees gave out and the night shifts became impossible. Someday when I needed something for myself. I gave it all to Cassidy's wedding without her asking me to, and without me knowing how to say no. She hugged me at the reception. She said, "Thank you, Mama." She smelled like expensive perfume, and she looked like a photograph, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment. This is what all of it was for. I should have stopped there, stayed in that moment. But moments like that don't last. 6 weeks after the wedding, Cassidy called to say they were planning a dinner. A celebration, she said. They'd just found out about the pregnancy. She wanted to share the news with both families together, over a nice meal. She'd made a reservation at Harlow's, the steakhouse downtown. She said, "I'd love for you to come, Mom." I said yes before she finished the sentence. I bought a new dress. Well, the Dillard's one. The navy one. I told you about that. I was careful with my hair. I took the earrings from my mother's jewelry box and I drove to Atlanta on a Tuesday in November. And I parked in the deck and I walked into Harlow's feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hopeful. There were 12 people at the table. My son-in-law's parents at the heads. His siblings, 2 brothers, both with their wives. His aunt and uncle from Savannah. His college roommate and his wife, Cassidy, and my son-in-law side by side in the middle, glowing the way young people glow when everything is going right for them. And me, at the corner, by the wall, next to an empty seat that had been saved for a late-arriving cousin. I sat down and I smiled and I said hello to the people near me. My son-in-law's mother gave me a small wave from across the table. She did not get up. The dinner started. The wine was poured, the bread came, the kind with rosemary and sea salt on top, and I ate it slowly because I hadn't eaten since noon, and I was trying to make it last. The conversation moved around the table like water moving around me, and I listened. I laughed when others laughed. I nodded. I was there. And then my son-in-law stood up. He tapped his glass. The table went quiet. He began to speak about the pregnancy, about how excited they were, about the future, about family. He talked about his parents, how much they'd supported him, how his father had been his role model, how his mother had taught him to love well. He thanked his brothers. He thanked his aunt and uncle for driving up from Savannah. He thanked his college roommate for being the brother he chose. He looked down the table toward me once. Just once. And what he said was, "And of course, we're grateful to everyone here who supported us in getting to this day, including the folks who helped us pull together the wedding." He paused. He smiled. He said, "Cassidy's mom was a real trooper, helped out a lot with the logistics." He moved on. Helped out with the logistics. The room didn't stop. No one reacted. Why would they? To them, it was just a sentence, just words, just a small moment in the middle of a long evening. The wine kept flowing. Someone laughed at something. The cousin arrived and took the empty seat beside me and didn't know my name. But I had given them $47,000. I had given up my entire savings account, the one I'd been building for 30 years, the one that was supposed to carry me through the back half of my life. I had worked through cancer monitoring appointments and post-surgical checkups and 6 months of waiting to find out whether the thing in my neck was finished or just resting. I had pressed my good dress and driven 45 minutes and sat in the corner by the wall, and I had been described as someone who helped out with the logistics. I looked at Cassidy. She was laughing at something her husband had just said. She did not look at me. I looked at my hands in my lap. I looked at the bread basket. I looked at the candle in the center of the table that was the kind of candle that doesn't drip, the expensive kind, the kind I would never buy for myself. Then I folded my napkin. I set it on the table beside my plate. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. I stood up quietly, the way you leave a library, the way you leave a church, the way you leave any place where making noise would be wrong. My son-in-law's mother looked up. She gave me a puzzled expression. I smiled at her. It was a real smile, surprisingly. Not a mean one, not a bitter one. Just a quiet one. I walked to the front of the restaurant. I asked the hostess to let me settle the cost of my portion, thinking I'd at least do that. The hostess looked at the reservation, looked at me, said everything was on a tab and would be taken care of at the end. I said thank you. I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking deck for a while. The engine was off. The deck smelled like exhaust and concrete. I could hear the distant sound of other cars, other people going other places. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I did not cry. Not there. Not then. I had used up most of my tears over the years, and what I had left, I was saving. I drove home. I walked into my house and I sat in the kitchen and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I looked at the yellow walls I painted myself 12 years ago, the ones I'd always meant to repaint but never got around to, and I thought very clearly, for the first time in a long time, about what I was going to do next. It took me 3 days. On the third day, I called my financial advisor. I say financial advisor. She is a woman from my church who does bookkeeping and helped me set up my accounts years ago, but she's smart, and she is careful, and she helped me understand exactly where I stood. I had my pension from 31 years of nursing. I had Social Security starting in 2 years. I had the house paid off, mine, and I had $47,000 less than I'd had 6 months ago. I also had a daughter who had never once asked how I was doing after my surgery without me bringing it up first. I made some decisions. I called my attorney, the one I'd used for the house refinancing years ago, and I told him I wanted to update my will. Not to take Cassidy out entirely. I want to be honest with you, I'm her mother. I couldn't do that, but I reorganized things. The house, which I had always assumed would go to Cassidy, I left to my sister's daughter, my niece, who is 28 and has been working 2 jobs and going to nursing school because she wants to follow in my footsteps. I left her the house and a letter explaining why. I left Cassidy the pearl earrings. My mother's earrings, the ones I wore to the dinner, I left them to her with a note that said simply, I wore these the night I finally understood. Then I stopped calling. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that announced itself. I just stopped being the one who reached out. I had always been the one who called first, who texted first, who drove the 45 minutes, who found the date that worked for her schedule. So I stopped. I put the phone down and I waited. It took 11 days for Cassidy to call me. She called on a Saturday morning, which is when we used to talk years ago before things changed. I let it ring. She called again an hour later. I answered. She said, Mom, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you. I said, You called twice, sweetheart. That's not quite trying. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Did something happen? Are you feeling all right? Is it your neck? And there it was, the word neck. Proof that she remembered. that somewhere inside her she still held that fact, still knew it was real. She'd just chosen not to tend to it. I said, "I'm fine. I'd just been doing some thinking." She asked, "What about?" I said, "About what I want my life to look like from here." She got quiet in a different way then. The silence changed texture. I didn't yell. I want to be very clear about that. I did not raise my voice or say cruel things or list every sacrifice in chronological order like a bill she owed me. That's not who I am. My mother didn't raise me to use pain as a weapon. But I did speak plainly, maybe for the first time in her adult life. I told her what that dinner felt like, not what her husband said, not word for word, not the indictment of it. I told her how I sat in the corner, how the seat next to me was empty until a cousin arrived who didn't know my name, how I folded my napkin and walked out and no one followed me to the door, how I sat in the parking deck for a while afterward and thought about the 45-minute drive home and whether I would cry, and decided I wasn't going to. I told her about the savings account, not as an accusation, just as a fact. 30 years of putting money away, every spare dollar I had after the mortgage and the utilities and the groceries and her school fees and her field trips and her prom dress and her college tuition and the agency nursing shifts I picked up so she could have things I never had. All of it emptied for a wedding where I was the woman who helped with the logistics. She was crying before I finished. I could hear it, the way her breathing changed, the small sounds she was trying to hold back. I said, "Cassidy, I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because I love you and because I am 62 years old and I have a scar on my neck and I have maybe 20 good years left if I'm lucky, and I am not going to spend them waiting to be seen." She said, "Mama, I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't. That's part of what I'm telling you." She asked to come see me. I said yes, but I told her to come in the daytime. Not at night, not on impulse. On a day she planned for, a day she drove to me. I needed her to make the effort all the way, not the halfway version I'd been accepting for years. She came the following Saturday. She brought food she'd made herself, which surprised me because I didn't know she cooked. We sat at my kitchen table under those yellow walls and we talked for 4 hours. She talked about her father, things I didn't know. The way his reappearance at graduation had confused her. The way she'd spent years trying to hold 2 families in her hands without dropping either one. She cried again. I held her hand. I told her that I forgave her. I meant it. Forgiveness is not something I do for the other person. I learned that from a woman I used to work with at Grady, a chaplain who said something I've never forgotten. Forgiveness is how you take back what the hurt stole from you. So I forgave her for me, so I could have my life back, the rest of it, the good part that was still out there waiting. But I also told her that things were going to be different, not cruel, not punishing, just honest. I would not be the one who called first anymore, not always. I would not drive to Atlanta every time. I would not write checks to fill spaces that weren't mine to fill. If she wanted me in her life, she would need to show up for that. Fully. Not halfway. She nodded. She said she understood. I don't know yet if she does. That part is still unfolding, the way most important things in life unfold slowly, 1 week at a time, 1 phone call at a time. She calls on Saturdays now. She called last weekend and talked for an hour about the nursery she's decorating and what colors feel right, and whether she wants to find out the sex or be surprised. She called me in the middle of the week once, just to say she'd driven past a Cracker Barrel and thought of me, because when she was small we used to stop at Cracker Barrel on road trips and she'd always get the macaroni. That call made me cry, the good kind of crying, the kind that means something is growing back. My son-in-law has not called me. I don't expect him to, not yet, maybe not ever. That's something between him and whatever he was raised to be. I hope the child they're carrying does better. I hope they raise that child to see people clearly, to understand that money is just money, but dignity is not replaceable, and that someday when they are sitting in a restaurant and someone at the table made everything possible, they will know it and they will say it out loud in the daytime, with their whole chest. I repainted the kitchen walls last month. After 12 years, I finally did it. I chose a color called Morning Fog, a kind of soft gray with just a little warmth in it. My niece helped me. She took 2 days off from her nursing clinicals and came up from Macon, and we painted together and ate pizza on the floor, and she asked me questions about what it was like in the early days at Grady, what I was afraid of the first time I had a patient who didn't make it, what kept me going. I told her the truth. I told her the only thing that ever really kept me going was the belief that what you give matters, even when no one is watching. That the patient at 3 in the morning who is frightened and alone needs the same care as the one with family in the waiting room. That showing up is a kind of love, even when it isn't acknowledged, even when it costs you. She wrote it down. She actually wrote it down in a little notebook she carries. That's worth something. That counts. I have my follow-up scan next month. The doctors remain cautiously optimistic, which is the phrase they use when they want you to feel good but not too comfortable. I've made peace with cautiously optimistic. It's where I live now, in that careful, hopeful space, watching the light come in through the kitchen window in the morning, drinking my coffee, listening to the birds, thinking about what I still want to do with the time I have. There's a road trip I've been thinking about, down to Savannah, maybe across to New Orleans. Places I've read about and never made it to because there was always something more urgent, something that needed paying for, someone who needed something from me first. Well, I am 62 years old, and my neck is healing, and my house is mine, and I have a pension and 2 years until Social Security and a niece who writes down the things I say. I think it's time to go see some things. I think it is finally, at long last, my turn. I spent a long time after that dinner asking myself what I had done wrong. Not in the way you'd expect. Not the dramatic version where you replay every moment looking for the mistake. More like the quiet kind. The kind that happens at 4 in the morning when you can't sleep and the house is completely still and you're just honest with yourself in a way you can't always be in the daytime. What I kept coming back to was this. I had taught Cassidy, without meaning to, that I didn't have limits. Every time I wrote a check I couldn't afford, every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I swallowed what I needed so she could have what she wanted, I was teaching her something. I was telling her through action that my comfort didn't count, that my dignity was negotiable, that I would keep showing up no matter how I was treated because that's just what I did. That's not love. I know that now. That's something that looks like love but isn't quite. Real love. The kind that actually helps someone grow into a decent human being has a shape to it. It has edges. It says yes, and it also says no, and the no is part of the caring, not a failure of it. Cassidy didn't become careless on purpose. She became careless because I made it easy. Her husband said what he said at that dinner because no one had ever shown him a cost. There are no consequences when someone keeps absorbing the damage silently. People don't change when they're comfortable. That's just the truth of it, and it doesn't make me angry anymore. It just makes me clear what I had to build. And this took time. This didn't happen in a week. Was a kind of inner steadiness that didn't depend on whether Cassidy called, or whether she saw me, or whether she gave me credit in a toast. I had to figure out who I was when no one was watching and no one was thanking me. It turned out I was someone who had worked 31 years without flinching. Someone who had sat in a doctor's office alone and written down hard words in her phone and driven herself home. Someone who had raised a child on night shift wages and vending machine dinners and still managed to be at every single school play. That person deserved better than a corner seat by the wall. The part I am most proud of, and I don't say that lightly, is that I didn't go cold. It would have been easy to go cold, to turn the hurt into hardness and call it strength. But I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table and I drank chamomile tea and I thought about what I actually wanted, which was not revenge. It was just to be known, to have someone look at me clearly and say, I see what you gave. I see who you are. When Cassidy finally came on that Saturday, and we sat under those yellow walls and talked for 4 hours, something started to repair. Not all the way. Not overnight. But the direction changed, and that matters more than the distance. My niece wrote down something I said while we were painting. She didn't tell me she was going to. She just did it quietly because something landed for her. That is the thing I want to carry forward. Not the dinner, not the parking deck, not the folded napkin. That moment, a young woman starting out in nursing, writing down the words of someone who came before her because she wanted to remember. That's what lasts. Not the money you spent or the hurt you survived. What lasts is what you passed on, and whether it was worth passing. I think, looking back, most of it was.